The strangest thing he ever said to me was also the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. We had been seeing each other for about 6 weeks. It was a Sunday morning, and we were in his kitchen, and he was making coffee badly. The way he did everything in the kitchen, with complete confidence and no technique, and I was sitting on the counter watching him. He turned around and looked at me for a moment like he was deciding something. Then he said, "I should probably tell you that I don't know how to love gently." I asked him what he meant. He said, "I've been told I'm too much, too intense, too serious, too focused, that I don't know how to be light about things, that I make people feel like they're being held too tightly, and then I let go too fast, and I don't know how to find the middle." He turned back to the coffee. He said, "I thought you should know before this goes any further." I sat on his counter for a moment with that. Then I said, "That's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me before asking me to stay." He looked over his shoulder. He said, "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm just telling you what you're dealing with." I stayed anyway. "My name is Ava. I'm 31 years old, and I design interiors for a small firm in Portland that mostly works with restaurants and hotels. I spend my days thinking about how spaces make people feel, what a room communicates before anyone says a word, what the distance between a wall and a chair tells you about whether you're supposed to linger or leave. I have been doing this long enough that I notice it everywhere now. I notice it in people's apartments, in the way someone arranges their furniture to face away from the window. In the spaces people leave between themselves and the things they love. I was good at reading spaces. I was not as good at reading myself. Before Ethan, there was Daniel. Daniel was smooth in the way that some men are smooth. The kind of smooth that felt like warmth for about 2 years and then revealed itself as distance wearing a warmer coat. He was charming at parties and quiet at home, and when things got hard, he didn't fight or leave dramatically. He just became less and less present, until one day I realized I had been alone in the relationship for about 6 months without registering the exact moment it happened. We ended things on a Tuesday in November. He said he thought we both knew it wasn't working. I agreed because it was true. I drove home and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes and cried not because I missed him, but because I had missed the version of us that had existed in the first year, and I didn't know when I had stopped noticing it was gone. After Daniel, I told myself I needed someone different. I built a careful list in my head. Present, direct, honest, someone who would tell me the truth even when it was uncomfortable. I should have been more specific about what that would actually feel like. For about 8 months after Daniel, I dated with the careful efficiency of someone checking a task off a list. I met a man who was kind and consistent and generated in me absolutely nothing. I met another who was interesting and unpredictable and generated in me too much of the wrong thing. I started to wonder if there was something wrong with my calibration. If I had spent so long in the wrong kind of relationship that I had lost the ability to recognize the right one. I was not depressed exactly. I was more like someone waiting for a train in a city they didn't particularly want to be in, not suffering, just suspended. I threw myself into work the way people throw themselves into work when they don't want to think about what's missing. I designed 2 restaurants and a boutique hotel lobby and a rooftop bar that got written up in a magazine. I got good at making spaces feel like something, without knowing what I myself was supposed to feel like. I met Ethan at a hardware store on a Saturday in March. I was looking for a specific size of wall anchor, and he was looking for the same thing, which in retrospect seems too convenient except that it was completely true. He was tall and had the kind of stillness about him that some people mistake for coldness. He found the wall anchors first and handed me 2 without being asked. I said, "Thank you." He said, "You're welcome." He started to walk away and then turned back, said, "Are you fixing something or building something?" I said. "Fixing," he said. "Those are the wrong anchors for fixing. They're for building into drywall from scratch. If you're fixing something that's already there, you want these." He handed me a different set. I looked at them. I said, "How do you know what I'm fixing?" He said, "I don't, but those would work either way." Then he left. I thought about that for 3 days. Not about him exactly, but about the specificity of it. The way he had just handed me the right thing without making a production of it. A mutual friend gave me his number 2 weeks later. She said, "I think you two would either get along perfectly or not at all, and I'm curious which." I texted him on a Thursday evening. He responded in 4 words, "When do you want to meet?" No question mark, just the assumption that we would. We had dinner at a small Italian place near my office. He was quieter than I expected. He asked questions and listened to the answers with the same quality of attention I had noticed in the hardware store. Like whatever I was saying was the most important thing currently happening. He didn't perform. He didn't charm. He just sat across from me and was entirely present in a way that felt almost uncomfortable because I wasn't used to it. I asked what he did. He said he had been a firefighter for 7 years and had left the department 8 months ago. He didn't say why right away, and I didn't ask. He said he was doing some consulting work and figuring out what came next. He said it like someone who had made peace with not knowing, which I respected. Later, much later, he told me more about those 7 years. He had loved the work in the way that people love things that cost them something. The structure of it, the clarity of it, the way every problem had a real answer that you either found or you didn't. He said the hardest part wasn't the danger. He said the hardest part was that the work required you to be completely present. And when the shift ended, there was no gradual transition back to ordinary life. You were in it and then you weren't, and the gap between those two states had never gotten smaller no matter how many years passed. He said he had started waking up at 3 a.m. for reasons he couldn't name. He said he had spent about a year trying to outwork it before he admitted that outworking it wasn't going to be enough. He left the department in January. He's described it as the hardest right decision he had ever made. I thought about that phrase for a long time afterward, the hardest right decision. The idea that something could be correct and painful at the same time, that those two things didn't cancel each other out. At the end of dinner, he said, "I'd like to see you again. Not would you like to, not maybe we could, I'd like to." Direct, present. True. I said yes. We saw each other 3 times before he kissed me, and when he did, it was in the middle of a sentence I was saying. And afterward, he said, "Sorry." I stopped listening to the words, and I said, "Don't apologize for that," and he almost smiled. That almost smile, that was the thing that got me. He didn't give them away easily, and so when one appeared, it felt like something earned. The Sunday morning in his kitchen was 6 weeks in, and after he told me he didn't know how to love, gently, he stood there with his bad coffee and waited for me to respond, not anxiously. He wasn't performing vulnerability for my benefit. He was just telling me the truth and waiting to see what I did with it. I thought about Daniel and his smooth disappearing act. I thought about the version of love I had been offered before, which had looked like ease and felt like emptiness. I said, "Show me what you mean." He looked at me. I said, "You said you don't know how to love gently. Show me what you mean by that. What does it actually look like?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When I care about something, I don't know how to do it at halfway. I call too much or not enough. I say things directly when people want them softened. I get focused on a problem, and I can't let it go until it's solved. And people aren't problems to be solved, but my brain doesn't always make the distinction fast enough. When someone I love is hurting, I want to fix it, and when I can't fix it, I go quiet, because I don't know what else to do. And I've been told that the going quiet feels like abandonment even though it isn't." He looked at his coffee. He said, "I've had 2 relationships in my adult life. One ended because she said I made her feel like a project. The other ended because she said she never knew what I was thinking." He looked up at me. "Those are contradictory things. I've been trying to figure out what the truth is for about 3 years. I sat with that," I said. "Daniel never told me any of that. About himself, about what he thought he was, about what he was afraid of. I was with him for 2 years, and I don't think I ever knew what he actually thought was wrong with him." Ethan said, "That sounds exhausting." I said it was. I didn't know it was exhausting until it was over. He handed me the coffee. It was too strong and slightly bitter, and I drank it without saying anything, because some things are worth accepting as they are. The next few months were not a love story, in the way I had imagined love stories when I was younger. There were no grand gestures. There was no single moment where everything became clear. Instead, there were small, consistent things that added up to something I didn't have a word for yet. He texted in the mornings, not long texts, just a line or two, something he had seen or thought, sometimes just a question he had been sitting with. They arrived reliably, which was a thing I hadn't known I needed until it was happening. When I was stressed about a project, he didn't tell me it would be okay. He asked questions about the project until he understood what the actual problem was, and then he thought about it with me. Sometimes he didn't have a solution, but he stayed with the problem instead of moving past it, and that was enough. He told me when something bothered him. Not always immediately. Sometimes he went quiet first, and I was learning to wait out quiet, to understand that it wasn't absence but processing, that he would come back with the actual words when he had found them. He always came back. Once in September, I said something careless in a moment of frustration. A comment about how he handled a situation that was more pointed than it needed to be. I knew it as soon as it left my mouth. He went quiet for about 20 minutes, and I waited, and then he came back and said, "That one hurt." Not as an accusation, just as information. And then he said, "I'm not going to pretend it didn't so we can move past it faster." I apologized, a real one, not the kind designed to make the discomfort stop. He said okay, and then we moved past it, but not before it had actually been addressed. That was the thing about Ethan. He didn't let things accumulate. He didn't smooth over the surface and let things rot underneath. It made him uncomfortable to leave things unresolved, and so they rarely were. I started to understand what he had meant in the kitchens that Sunday morning. He didn't know how to love gently, in the sense of keeping things light and easy and uncomplicated. He knew how to love with his whole attention, which was a different thing, and in some ways a more demanding one. Being loved that way required me to be present too. It required me to say what I actually meant instead of the softer version. It required me to stop managing his perception of me and just be the version that was actually true. That was harder than I expected. There was a night in October when I was sitting with a project that wasn't working, and I had been staring at the same set of drawings for 3 hours, and I said out loud to no one, "I don't know what I'm doing." Not about the project, about any of it. About what I was building, and whether I was any good at it, and whether the version of myself I presented to the world had anything to do with what was actually inside. Ethan was reading on the couch. He looked up. "Are we still talking about the project?" I said. "I don't think so." He set the book down. He came and sat next to me at the table and looked at the drawings for a minute. Then he looked at me. He said, "What are you actually afraid of?" I said, "That I'm good at making things look like what they're supposed to be and not good at making them actually be that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a real thing to be afraid of." He didn't tell me I was wrong. He didn't tell me I was too hard on myself. He just acknowledged that the fear was real and sat there with me while I felt it. Then he said, "But I've watched you work. And the thing that you do, the way you think about what a space is actually for, not just what it looks like, that's not performing, that's real." I looked at him. He said, "I know the difference. I've watched you around people who perform, and you don't do that. You get quiet and you pay attention, and then you say the true thing, even when it's harder." I said, "You do that too." He said, "I know." That's how I recognized it. We sat at my work table in October with the drawings between us and the city outside the window, and I thought about what he had said on the Sunday morning in his kitchen, that he didn't know how to love gently, that he had thought I should know before this went any further. I thought about what it had cost him to say that, to name his own limitation out loud to someone he was beginning to care about, and then hand it to her and wait. I thought about Daniel, about 2 years of smooth, easy surfaces, and the way I had eventually realized there was nothing underneath. I said, "I think I've been confusing gentleness with honesty. I thought gentle meant careful. I thought careful meant safe." Ethan said, "Careful and safe aren't the same thing." I said, "No, they're not." He took my hand on top of the drawings, not dramatically. Just put his hand over mine, the way you put a hand on something you're trying to keep in place. I turned mine over and held it. We stayed like that for a while. The city moved outside the window. The drawings sat between us unfinished. That was the night I understood that I had been spending a long time looking for something that felt like ease when what I actually needed was something that felt like truth. They don't always come in the same package. Sometimes truth is harder to sit with than ease. Sometimes it asks more of you. Sometimes it means having the conversation instead of letting the moment pass. Sometimes it means staying at the table with the unfinished drawings, and the person who told you who he was before you had even decided to trust him. Ethan proposed on an ordinary Wednesday. No restaurant, no setup, no audience. He came home with groceries, and while I was sitting at the kitchen counter, he stopped in the middle of the kitchen and said, "I want to ask you something." I looked up. He said, "I want to marry you. I know I'm not easy. I know I go quiet when I should probably talk. And I know I say things directly when softer would be kinder, and I know I don't always know what to do, with the middle ground between too much and not enough. But I have been trying to figure it out, and I think I'm better at it than I was a year ago. And I think I'll be better at it a year from now because you make me want to be," he said. "I'm not asking because this is easy. I'm asking because you're the person I want to keep working at it with." I said yes before he finished. He put a simple ring on my finger at the kitchen counter. It had belonged to his grandmother. He said she had been the most direct person he had ever known, and that she had always told him that the things worth having required you to say so, out loud. I looked at it on my hand. I thought about the hardware store and the wall anchors, and the way he had just handed me the right thing, without making a production of it. I said, "You've been doing that this whole time." He said, "What?" I said, "Handing me the right thing, without making it a performance." He considered this. He said, "That's the only way I know how to do it." I know. That's what I mean. We got married the following April, in a small ceremony in the garden of a restaurant I had designed 2 years earlier. 20 people, good food, no speeches except one from his former captain at the fire department who said that Ethan was the kind of person who ran toward the hard thing, and he had been watching him do exactly that for years, and he was glad he had finally found someone worth running toward. Ethan cried at that. He turned his face away, and I pretended not to notice. And then I took his hand under the table so he would know I had. We still argue sometimes. He still goes quiet when I would rather he talked, and I still say the softer version when the true version would serve us better. We are still two people who do not always know how to do this, working at it every day, because the alternative is pretending it's easier than it is. There is a particular kind of love that doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller, that doesn't require you to manage the other person's feelings about who you are, that lets you say the true thing and then waits to see what you do with theirs. I didn't know that was what I was looking for until I found it. I had been looking for ease and calling it love for so long that when I finally encountered something that required more of me, I almost mistook the difficulty for a warning sign. It wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. He wakes up early most mornings still. The 3 a.m. thing never fully went away. Sometimes I wake up too, and he's sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I come and sit across from him, and we don't always talk. Sometimes we just sit there in the dark together, two people who have both learned that being present doesn't always require words. He told me once, about 6 months after we got married, that this was the thing he had always wanted and never known how to ask for. Someone to sit in the quiet with. Someone who didn't need him to fill every silence. I said, "I had the same thing on my list. I just called it something else." He said, "What did you call it?" I said, "I called it calm. I thought I was looking for calm," he said, "and now," I said. "Now I think what I was looking for was someone who made the quiet feel like enough." He looked at his coffee. He said, "I think that might be the gentlest thing anyone has ever said to me, but he told me who he was before he asked me to stay. He handed me the real thing and let me decide. That is the gentlest thing anyone has ever done for me, and he did it without knowing how.